All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I am Suzanne Bontempo, Program Manager for Our Water, Our World. And I have Charlotte Canner with me today, who is also an IPM advocate for the Our Water, Our World program. And we're going to talk about veggie gardening, more food, fewer pests. And our wonderful sponsor today, get advanced, Charlotte, sorry.
Sorry, hold on one second. I need to get out of this for a second. And now I can start. The poll is blocking my view for some reason. Okay, here we go. Welcome, everyone.
Okay, yeah, welcome everyone. We're so happy you can be here, and we're going to talk about pest management, talking about some of the common pests that are occurring right now. It's August, and what we should be doing in our food gardens. We're going to go through slides for about 55 minutes. It is a lot of information we want to share with you. As always, we try to really trim it down, and we're not always as successful as we'd like, but we have a lot of information. We're going to talk about how to grow a healthy garden for the home gardener. We're going to look at what we can do now to keep the health of our summer gardens at peak, and how to continue with optimum harvesting and food yields. And then we're going to look at pest management and troubleshooting, and then we'll have time for your questions at the end, and we'll take all the time you need. And our sponsor today, our wonderful sponsor, is the Alameda County-wide Clean Water Program. It works to protect Alameda County's creeks, wetlands, and the bay from runoff that may carry pollutants into waterways. Related to gardening, that means avoiding chemicals that can be washed off of our lawn and garden and into the storm drains by irrigation and rain. And please sign up for their newsletter at cleanwaterprogram.org, where you'll learn about events and programs coming up and other ways to get involved throughout the community. And as I mentioned, you can watch all of our past webinars that we have recorded. We've got 5, today is 6. This will be up on their YouTube channel in a couple of days, but please go to the Clean Water Program Alameda County YouTube channel and check out our past webinars. They are loaded with a lot of information, and today we will not really be talking about irrigation, although some people have already asked, but because we've talked about it before, we've gotten a lot of comments that people wanted to hear more about pest problems, which we're going to focus on today. And the Our Water, Our World program, for all of you that have not heard of it, thank you for saying that. This is a program that is throughout Northern California and through some sections of Central California, Santa Barbara, Fresno, San Joaquin area, Monterey, and then north. And we're a program that was designed to bring awareness between pesticides and water quality. It is an IPM, or Integrated Pest Management, educational program for the public. We partner with water pollution prevention agencies and retail stores that sell pesticides. And we offer IPM education to the associates as well as the consumers, to us, the public. And we talk to folks about how to solve pest problems with a less toxic approach. You might recognize the rack that's on the left. That's in a lot of the retailers throughout Alameda County. It has handouts that talk about solutions for specific pest problems such as ants and aphids, spiders, cockroaches, weeds, and so forth. We partner with the UCIPM Integrated Pest Management Division. They help us, and these are going to be a little bit more succinct in regards to the UCIPM website. These will be a little bit easier to read, a little bit easier to access. You can also find the information online at ourwaterourworld.org. And you also might notice that these little shelf talkers are placed under eco-friendly products at most of the retailers that we work with to help guide you to a safe, less toxic solution. Kind of like a cheat sheet.
All right, and IPM, Integrated Pest Management, a phrase we've already used a few times. So let's define that for you so you know what we're talking about. IPM is it's a decision-making process, and it uses science to solve pest problems. It also is it's a way to look at your garden or your home as a whole system, as an ecosystem, and have a holistic view. And it also involves asking lots of questions. So when we do see a problem, we want to identify the problem, make sure it's actually a pest and not a good bug. So asking, what is it? And maybe the problem isn't a pest at all. It could be a nutrient deficiency or some other environmental disorder. So we really want to identify the problem. And then we want to ask, can we live with it? Sometimes some damage on plants is not so bad, or the pest is very short-lived. So we can maybe just wait out their life cycle and tolerate them. But then if we do decide we want to take action, there are some different actions that we can take called controls. Cultural controls, which is focusing on the health of the environment. Mechanical controls, which are tools that we can use. Biological controls, which would be living organisms, both insects and other larger organisms that can help keep balance in the garden. And then lastly would be chemical controls or pesticides. And we're going to go into depth about each of these in this next hour or 45 minutes or so. And we are going to hopefully set you up for veggie garden success by using these IPM methodologies. So first would be cultural controls. And again, this is really all about increasing the health of the garden. So these are practices that we can do when we don't even see pests. We're always just going to do these practices to maintain a healthy garden, regardless of pests or not. Because also maintaining a healthy garden will help prevent pest problems from even coming. And when pest problems do arrive, healthy plants can actually fight off those infections better. Just like us humans, healthy bodies can prevent and fight off infections when they arrive. So some things that we can do are adding compost, using organic fertilizers, protecting soil with mulch, planting the right plant in the right place. If you've been to a webinar of ours before, we do talk about this a lot, usually in regards to perennials, but in this case, it's the same with veggies as well. I live in a foggy, cold area of San Francisco. I gave up planting tomatoes a long time ago because it's just not the right place for them. We're going to water deeply and less often, especially as the plants grow, and we're going to focus on healthy garden maintenance. And now when we're thinking about a healthy garden, we want to focus literally at the literal and figurative foundation of our garden is the soil. So we want to avoid disturbing the soil. And this is disturbing. Disturbing means tilling, double digging, even stepping on a garden bed is a way of disturbance of the soil. And the reason we want to do this is because when the soil when we're growing healthy soil, there is life in the soil. The soil is forming nice, good structure. And then when we use tools like tilling and or just stepping on our soil, that structure gets destroyed. And it does sound, sometimes it's a little hard to imagine not digging or turning over your soil, especially when you're focusing on veggies, because there is a lot of replanting that goes into it, but there are ways to avoid disturbing the soil. And another reason we want to not disturb the soil is because we don't want to disrupt the good bacteria and fungi that is growing and being active in our healthy soil. Soil aggregates, which are like clumps of soil, particles put together that form good soil structure. Those can be thought of as little microbe condos or little homes for these microbes and insects in the soil. So we really don't want to break them up. We don't want to smush them. We want to leave their homes alone. so that they can be, reproducing and active and helping our plants break down organic material, provide nutrients to our plants. Bacteria and fungi actually hold that soil together, so they build on that structure themselves. And they also break down toxins and pollutants in the soil. So to also increase the health of the soil and our plants, we want to use compost. So you might have added compost to your soil when you first planted your veggies, but those veggies have been growing quite large and producing fruits for you all summer. So they have been using up a lot of those resources. So it's time to add back some more nutrients to the soil to help your plants continue growing throughout the rest of the growing season. So adding compost to your soil will help with that soil structure as well. It increases the microbes and fungi and bacteria in your soil. And it also increases the water holding capacity in your soil, which is important as we continue through drought-stricken, dry, hot months of the summer. Earthworm castings are another great amendment to your soil. They're like superfood for your veggies. They contain lots of nutrients and minerals that your plants do need to thrive. They also have enzymes and beneficial bacteria that can be added to the soil. And they actually do have pest and disease preventing properties to them when they are added to your soil, and they can neutralize the pH levels. And earthworm castings are really just to be clear, they are the worm poo that is created when the worms eat some organic materials. You can have, you can buy earthworm castings at stores. They do sell it bagged. You can also have your own worm bin at home, or you can see if any neighbors or friends have a worm bin and want to share with you.
Awesome. Great questions are coming in. I really appreciate it. I will, before we continue, I will share that I will be sending a link to this recording in a follow-up email. And another great question came in about how to add the compost, how to side dress a plant. If you have mulch, yes, you can move that mulch aside, get a nice layer of compost around the plants, around that drip line, around the root zone, and then put that nice layer of mulch back on top. And what we want to do is we want to continue to feed our food crops. And the best way, or for me, the easiest way, is to work with liquid organic fertilizers because I don't have to do a lot of work. I can kind of apply them with a lot of ease. They keep my veggies healthy. And I'm going to always apply them according to the directions, the application rate on the label. And the easy way for me is I really just have my watering can, my 2-gallon watering can. I add that liquid fertilizer, fill it up with water. Of course, reading the application rate to see how much of the fertilizer I need to add for 2 gallons. And I just apply it as a soil drench. And you can also apply it as a foliar spray. Very easy. Side note, if we're using these really good organic liquid fertilizers as a foliar spray, they do have a tendency to clog the nozzle, so just be patient. That is normal. And you can also feed with dry fertilizer, not a problem. I mean, I always add dry fertilizer at time of planting. And of course, for my perennial crops, I will apply and feed annually. However, when my veggies are growing, it's just easier for me to just use the liquid fertilizer. It's a little faster, more convenient. I get lazy. I can also share one of my most favorite dry fertilizers I love to add is Alfalfa Meal, because similar to the earthworm castings, it is it supercharges your plants. It's like a superfood. It adds nitrogen and trace minerals to the soil. It improves the tilth, which we always love. But most importantly, alfalfa meal contains this natural fatty acid growth stimulant called, let's see, trianocontanol. I don't know how to say that. How would you pronounce it, Charlotte? I don't know. I apologize.
Triantonnitol?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. All right. And then the way we would get these dry fertilizers into the soil very easily is that we could move the mulch to the side if we have that nice thick layer of mulch, and just lightly scratch the fertilizer into the top inch or so to avoid disturbing the plant roots. And then we can put that mulch back on top of that soil to protect it, which is so amazing. And the mulch that we're talking about is beautiful, chunky wood chip mulch. This is going to really help protect your soil, and it's going to help protect the soil by reducing the water evaporation rate. It also really helps that water infiltrate and get into the soil without running off. And it also insulates the soil from heat, keeping those temperatures more regulated. So it's going to keep the soil cooler in the summer, warmer in the winter. It also creates habitat for beneficial insects. But it is really important, especially now, since we are in a little bit of water conservation time, is to have a nice thick layer. And I'm always saying about 2 to 4 inches. We want to have that layer, but always remember not to have the mulch around the crown of the plant or touching any of the plant parts, because it can really rot some of that plant material. And if you haven't already, it's time to adjust your irrigation. So now that those plants have nice deep root systems that have grown and really established, we are now able to water deeper and less often. So especially now that a lot of the food crops are producing food, if we want to have like better flavors, we absolutely want to avoid watering every day. We really want to reduce how frequently we're watering, because we want to really capture the richness of the flavors of all the food crops. I know, we're sorry. There is about a 2 or 3 second delay on all the slides, so we apologize. Many of the plants in your food gardens have grown. They look amazing. I know a number of us have more than we bargain for when it comes to tomatoes and zucchinis. But the plants have grown, which means they're shading the ground, which is reducing the water evaporation. It's keeping the soil moist and cooler. So that means we can water less often. So that's just something that's going to be really important, is that we are going to not be watering as often, because that's also going to, when we're overwatering, that can also lead to pest problems, fungal disease problems, and plant stress, which will make more pests.
All right, so that was cultural controls, really just focusing on the health of the garden to have healthy plants and prevent pests even coming into the yard or into the garden. And then next is mechanical controls. And now these are like physical tools that we can use in the garden to manage our pests and to keep them out. So we want to, and a lot of these also can be used as prevention. So before we even have pests in our yard, we can implement some tools like deer fencing. If you know you're in a deer prone area, you will want to put those up before you have deer damage. Gopher baskets also we'll talk about in a second, excellent preventative measure. We want to understand the timing of management action, even with our mechanical controls. So putting traps out at the appropriate time of summer can help with yellow jacket management. And then correct watering and fertilizing also, and then good sanitation, cleaning up the garden and harvesting on time. Also mechanical controls, and then using shade cloth and arbor paint. And we'll talk a little bit more about each. So barriers are an excellent, effective, non-toxic tool, mechanical control for your garden, and they're going to be necessary, especially in a lot of veggie gardens, for sure, where that yummy food is very attractive to pests. So row cover can be used to, that's the middle photo with the white, that's row cover. That's covering young seedlings to prevent them from being eaten by birds. Also, row cover can protect plants from flying insects landing on the leaves and laying eggs. Netting can be used to keep birds and squirrels and other flying insects out. Gopher baskets, again, essential in the Bay Area. If you don't have gophers yet, you will. Necessary anytime you're putting a plant in the ground. Deer fencing, as I said, should be can be utilized to keep deer out. Copper tape can be wrapped around or used to prevent snails and slugs from coming in. And scare tape is not necessarily a barrier, but it's more of a deterrent. It's a sparkly, shiny tape that's often used to keep birds out. I've seen people use even like CDs, old CDs hung from trees to keep birds out as well. They just don't like the shiny material. And more barriers in the form of exclusion frames, fencing, and baskets. It's important to know what kind of critters are actually eating your plants before you install these so that you get the right size. Rats and mice require 1/4-inch hardware cloth, a very fine hardware cloth, to keep them out. Gophers are a little bit bigger, so a 1/2-inch hardware cloth will keep them out. Squirrels, 3/4-inch fencing or poultry wire or something similar can keep them out, or bird netting also. And then deer require a 7-foot tall fence or taller, because they can jump over anything shorter than that. And then we just wanted to share some more images of exclusion in veggie gardens, because these really are tools that are necessary, and you'll probably see them in most veggie gardens, because no matter where you are, there are deer, other critters, anything wants to eat your plants, especially when you're growing veggies. So, and there are some very pretty options out there. So just understanding that this is a very common and very useful tool that veggie gardeners use all the time. And a little bit more about gophers, because they are probably everyone, I mean, they are just the most annoying pests in the Bay Area. Gophers live underground. They very rarely come up above ground, maybe poke their heads up a little bit. They create mounds. The mounds tend to be crescent shaped with a plugged hole, although I will admit it is very hard to see that when you're looking at mounds. They do eat plant material. They usually eat roots, and then sometimes they will eat fruits that are touching the ground, like this butternut squash. They can also pull plants just straight down into their holes. Sometimes you can see a plant actually like wiggling or just be pulled straight down. That's a gopher. Moles, on the other hand, eat grubs and insects in the soil. So they won't, if you have plant damage, that's likely gophers. If you just have tunnels or mounds, but no plant damage, that's a good chance that you have moles. And then, and really the best way to manage, again, gophers is baskets. When you're planting individual plants, there's pre-made gopher baskets that expand, and you put your plant, it has to be bigger than your plant. Dig a hole, put the basket in, fill a little bit with soil, put your plant in there. They should go up above the soil surface a few inches, so that the gopher can't hop over them, because sometimes they do come up and over. And then if you're installing raised beds, you're going to want to line your raised beds all the way up the sides with gopher wire, so that they can't come up and eat your veggies. And now with other urban critters, raccoons, squirrels, and cats, they can be a real problem in gardens. The biggest thing you want to do is remove any food sources. Don't invite them in with food. So no free feeding any animals outside, no feeding raccoons. Definitely not. No, and they will eat, pet food that's left outside. Securing garbage cans. Really just any picking up fruit and nuts that have fallen from trees or that's in your garden. You want to really just eliminate anything that's attractive to them. And then you want to exclude them from it, like we said with the exclusion frames, keep them away from those food sources. And then there's some other tactics you can use for sites such as cats, scratching or making a mess in gardens. You can lay down barriers such as poultry wire on that mulch or soil surface wherever they're scratching, and they're not gonna want to scratch with that wire there, so they'll leave you alone eventually. Raccoons also tend to, if you have some freshly laid sod, sometimes they roll it up and then search around underneath for grubs and insects. So if you put some poultry wire down and secure it with irrigation, I forgot what those things are, the irrigation posts, I forgot what they're called. It can be secured down and they won't roll up your sod. Other mechanical controls are traps, and traps can be used for a variety of pests. So there's gopher traps, rodent, mice, and rat traps, yellow jacket and fly traps, even sticky pieces of paper that can attract aphids, thrips, whiteflies, lots of flying insects, and even snails and slugs. You can make traps for them. The image on the bottom left is a slug and snail trap that just a board that they hide under, and then we can in the middle of the day when they're hiding, we can scrape them off into some soapy water. And then mechanical controls also are used to protect your plants from the sun and the heat. It is still hot out there and sunny, so you do want to protect those plants by using shade cloth, or you can use a water-based light colored paint like the Ivy Organic that's made for painting trunks of trees that can also help with the heat and sun scald.
All right, we've got a great chat going on. We've got some great questions coming up. I like to clarify that when we talk about mulch, and I am so sorry we're not talking about gorilla hair, or I should say gorilla hair or shredded cedar is not advised these days because of its combustibility. And since we are in California and it seems like the whole state is on fire at times, especially this time of year, we really recommend a nice chunky bark, either an arbor wood mulch, which is what the tree trimmers shoot through the tree chippers, and then that's the product that is from trimming trees. Or you can go to your local landscape supply yard and look for fir bark, chunky fir bark, such as 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch, and that will be perfect. Okay, IPM method, biological controls. So the biological controls are using living organisms to manage pests. However, I'm specifically talking about beneficial insects and pollinators and birds and other critters that might also be in our gardens, the habitat that we've created to eat or parasitize. Thank you, Charlotte. Tongue twister. Pests and pollinator flowers. So we just really would like to, if you haven't seen our webinar on beneficial insects in the garden, Gardening for the Good Bugs, please check it out, because there are a lot of good bugs in our garden that are actually doing a lot of important work for us that will reduce the need for us having to use a pesticide, even an eco-friendly pesticide. The way we attract beneficial insects is with flowers. We want to plant a biodiversity of flowering plants. Here in the Bay Area, especially throughout Alameda County, we are so lucky. We can have something in bloom just about year round, and which is very important because on those sunny days, if we still have, in the middle of December, if we have a really nice warm day, pollinators are going to be out buzzing around, and having some asters still in bloom is always going to provide wonderful food for foraging pollinators, and nectar sources for a lot of our beneficial insects that might also be cruising around on those warm days. The types of flowers we want to plant are flowers that look like a daisy or a sunflower. So those types of flowers that are like rays with a button middle, like maybe like cosmos or asters, or flowers that grow in a cluster of tiny flowers, such as my ergononium and yarrow, ceanothus, alyssum. These are all going to be really fantastic and wonderful nectar sources and pollen plants for beneficial insects. And I can attest to it that if you plant, they will come. Absolutely. And another part of healthy gardening and, healthy food gardening is cleaning up the garden and monitoring for pest problems. So it's important that we manage the weeds throughout the garden, either mow weeded areas to prevent pest insect habitats, or hand pull weeds between our veggies because they also compete for water. We want to harvest the food crops. We really want to harvest our food when it's ripe so that we can actually reduce a number of pests that will come and feed on that food, such as yellow jackets, rats, and other urban critters. And we also want to kind of be mindful and inspect for fungal problems that might occur, like powdery mildew, which the spores will blow in the wind and it will get on other plants. Oftentimes we see powdery mildew on the older leaves of plants, such as summer squash, that we can simply cut those plants off, cut those leaves off and get it into the green bin, the compost waste bin, and get it off site. We can also hose off the plants parts that have powdery mildew, or syringe it with a spray bottle of water just to wash off that powdery mildew. Those spores actually thrive in dry conditions. So when we wash them off, we're actually popping all those spores. If it's black spot or rust, we're going to want to remove those leaves, defoliate the plant, maybe the bottom third, and get those off site. And then we want to selectively prune and thin. We want to open up air circulation so that we can see all plant parts with a little bit more ease and get more air circulation in there. And actually, when we thin and prune, we're actually making more exposure for a lot of the critters like rats. So they're not going to feel as protected because they know that they are prey. And then to continue to boost our yields, we want to go through and trim a lot of our plants, deadhead, to boost yields. Of course, thinning the tomato plants and the summer squash is perfectly great to do right now. In fact, I thin and I prune up. I've got about 18 inches underneath my tomato plants clear, so that I can avoid rats getting in there, but also and voles. And I go through and I deadhead all my basil and any other food crops that I want to extend the season. And it's not too late for some of our fast growing crops, such as basil, cilantro, radishes. Lettuces, it's always nice to plant in succession so that for our fast growing crops so that we always have a little bit of food throughout the harvest season. It's pretty fun. And a reminder that it is important, oh so important, to rotate our annual food crops to prevent pest problems for a number of reasons. And they all could be slightly different, but it is important that we're always moving food crops from one garden bed to another to reduce pest problems and to increase the health of those food crops. You could certainly get more information about rotating crops online. I know the Farmer's Almanac has a lot of great information on, as well as a lot of resources. But then companion planting is also a very important part to healthy food gardening. This is also known as intercropping or polyculture or biodiversity. These are the scientific words for companion planting. And so when we take advantage of planting multiple varieties together. So why is companion planting so helpful? Well, it supports the plant growth and it also aids with pest control. So maybe it's your garden beds are already planted up right now and it won't be so easy to, integrate different types of crops together. However, moving forward, it's really nice to understand that when we work with different types of companion planting ideas, it will help prevent those plants from competing for nutrients. So we plant plants that like to grow together for really one of the main reasons I do is so that they're not competing for nutrients. They all are going to get what they need. And then we're going to rotate that crop and we're going to put something else there that can grow in that space and maybe replenish those nutrients. We also understand that a lot of plants improve the nutrients available in the soil. So I'm going to briefly talk about cover crops, or Charlotte's going to talk about cover crops in a minute and understand why that's so important. We also know that plants are known to share resources and send alarms through the network of their mycorrhizal fungi. So, and yet another reason why we want to avoid disturbing the soil whenever possible, avoid tilling it. Some plants have allelopathic properties that inhibit the growth of other plants. So that they can dominate. And this can be either good or bad. So some examples I have in this photo here, I read that, well, maybe that goes up to the next one, where plants have powerful fragrance that masks the desirable food crops. That's what the picture is really speaking to. So let me give you some examples of allelopathic. So broccoli, if we plant broccoli, understand that it's really important to rotate that out, because if we plant broccoli again, it has these properties which will inhibit future broccoli or brassica crops. And but we plant French marigolds throughout our veggie gardens because it can prevent the root knot nematode eggs from hatching. So you see how it can go either way. It either could be a benefit or a detriment depending on what we want to achieve. But then plants with powerful fragrances can mask the desirable food crops. So in this case, I've just recently learned that oregano planted near cucumbers prevents the cucumber beetle. So I had some oregano in pots and I was like, well, let's just see how it works. And I'm going to tell you, I have no cucumber beetles on my cucumbers, though I have cucumber beetles throughout other areas of my garden. Companion planting can also be for living structural support and plant support. So you might recall corns, beans, and squash, that concept where the corn was the stalk or plant support for the beans. And companion planting can also help with attracting pollinators and beneficial insects, as I just shared a moment ago. Kind of cool. It's really fun.
Very cool. I love it. And then, so as we are in the garden and maybe, well, we're still in the thick of the growing season, but as you're approaching the next fall months and things start slowing down and you're growing less, there might be some holes in your garden. And what we want to make sure, old thought was that, okay, winter months, we let our soil rest and just lay fallow. But actually, and never mind. And actually what we want to do is we want to continue growing in the soil, but we want to use cover crops or other crops that actually add nutrients to the soil as they're growing. So crimson clover is a great option, both cool and warm season, that improves the soil health and attracts beneficial insects. And then fava beans are another very popular, easy to grow plant that actually adds nitrogen to the soil as it's growing. And both of these cover crops are also really important because you don't want bare soil. So if you don't have something growing in that area, it's best to just throw in a cover crop, have something growing, covering your soil, acting like a mulch, keeping that healthy, the beneficial bacteria and fungi active in the soil, instead of just letting it bare, dry out, and nothing happening in that soil. So fava beans are an excellent option. You do want to, this is a picture of the nitrogen fixing nodules on the roots. They actually add nitrogen as they're growing in the soil. So you can actually plant along with heavy nitrogen feeders, or you can just plant your fava beans or other cover crops in the soil after or before you're putting in a nice heavy feeder like tomatoes. You do want to, if you're planting fava beans or other cover crops, you do want to, if you're planting them for nitrogen fixing purposes, you do want to make sure you cut them down just as they're starting to flower, just before they flower, because that'll give the maximum nitrogen fixing properties in the soil instead of sending their energy out to the flowers. Though fava beans are great because you can also eat them as well. So it might be good to either have a separate section of your garden dedicated to your eating fava beans, or you're saving the seed. You can also save the seeds of the fava beans, a few of them, let them go to seed, and then let the seed dry up, the seed pod dry up on the plant, and then harvest those seeds for next year's use. But otherwise, you want to cut the plant at the base and leave the roots in the ground. That will not only cause less disturbance in the soil, and it will keep that nitrogen fixing properties in that soil as well. And another very important tip in the garden is to take notes, keep a journal, and take a lot of photos. I'll tell you from personal experience, you're not going to remember. So take notes and take photos of what you planted, when you planted it, how did it go, were there any, unusual weather circumstances. Take notes of everything, and that's going to help you for next year, because as we've said in past webinars, every yard has its own microclimate. So what does well in one corner of your yard might not do well in the other corner of the yard, or different plants might not do well in the same spot. So taking notes is going to let you decipher what's going to work best, where and when. All right, so we've covered cultural, mechanical, and biological controls and just healthy sanitation and maintenance. Our last control in IPM is chemical controls. And I say last because it is always going to be used as a last resort. We want to use all of those other tactics, actions, and controls before we reach for the pesticides. And we also want to understand that even organic or eco-friendly pesticides do cause potential harm to beneficial insect populations. So anything that's anything that's a pesticide is designed to kill, so we have to be very careful. And also remembering that pesticides don't solve pest problems. It kills pests, but it's usually in the short term. So we want to, when we do have pest problems, we do really want to find the root of the problem. Why is this plant attracting aphids all the time? Why, what's out of balance in my garden? Because yes, the pesticides will kill the pest in the short term. You will continue to have that problem if you don't get to the root of the problem. And before you use any pesticides, we really want to focus on a proper identification of the bug, of the insect. We want to identify it, make sure it's not a good bug, because a lot of good bugs do look very similar to bad bugs. So we want to make sure we're actually targeting a pest and not a beneficial insect. We want to understand their life cycles, because again, some life cycles are very short. We can just wait them out usually if they don't cause a lot of damage. We also want to understand when is the best time to take action. Sometimes you can only take action during the larval stage, and by the time they're adults, there's really nothing you can do. So we want to understand the life cycle. We want to understand the habitat and timing of the pests. Some pests only arrive on certain plants certain times of year. And so when we understand that, when we're planting those plants, we'll be able to have preventative measures or be ready for those pests when they arrive. We also want to understand what the pest is, because then we know if they have natural enemies, and we can keep an eye out for them in the garden. And if they are present, we are not going to use any pesticides, and we are going to nurture them the best we can. And remembering that 90% of the bugs that we see in the garden are actually beneficial insects. So again, we want to make sure we are targeting, we know what we're looking at when we take any action. And now I want to highlight a few specific pesticides. Again, if you decide to use a pesticide, there are several less toxic, more eco-friendly products on the shelves available to you. But they're not all the same, and they're not all 100%, harm-free. They're still designed to kill something. So it's really important that you always read the label. The label is the law. On the label, you'll find what pest is targeted by that pesticide. And if the pest that you have is not on the label, you cannot use that product. Also on the label is going to have more information about how to apply the product. Different pests and different plants require different kinds of applications. So you do really want to read that before you even buy the product, and then especially before you're applying it. So these three pesticides, insecticidal soaps, neem oils, and spinosad, are very popular, commonly used pesticides. So we just wanted to just talk a little bit about each one of them. So insecticidal soap, the active ingredient you'll always see on the front of the label of the pesticide bottle is potassium salts of fatty acids. This is a very narrow spectrum pesticide, and that's really what we want. We want a narrow spectrum pesticide. It's only going to kill a certain variety of pests. It's used to kill soft-bodied insects. So it actually it disrupts the cell membranes on the insect's body, and it will cause that to die. So it's a contact kill. You do have to spray onto the insect. You can't just spray around it. Doesn't matter if it eats it, it needs to be on it, a contact kill. And insecticidal soaps are used for mites, mealybugs, aphids, white fly nymphs, and a few other soft-bodied insects. And I want to remind you that this is not a dish detergent or a hand soap. Insecticidal soaps are formulated for killing insects. Dish soap or other soaps you might find in the household cleaning aisle do contain dyes and detergents that we do not want in our gardens. And again, the insecticidal soaps are formulated for pests. They come with labels and instructions on how to use them. So we really want to focus on using those and not making our own DIY soap at home. And then neem oil, super popular product, clarified hydrophobic extract of neem oil. It's a product that's been used for thousands of years, and is well known for its insecticidal properties. But we do want to share, it is broad spectrum, and while it is neem, it comes from a plant, it still causes harm, can cause harm to beneficial insects. So you still do need to spray it with extreme caution. So it's an insecticide, a fungicide, and a miticide, which means it kills mites, fungus, and insects. Different applications will require, well, different targets will require different applications. So again, reading the label, reading what you're targeting, and how to apply it for that specific target. And I do want to share that it should not be used as a preventative measure. We never want to use pesticides as a preventative measure, especially in the case of neem oil, because it can be toxic to beneficial insects and including bees. And then spinosad is it's derived from a naturally occurring soil-dwelling bacteria that disrupts insects' neurotransmission. It is also broad spectrum, so it can kill a lot more insects than we intend it to. So we do need to spray with great care. It's intended for killing insects with chewing or rasping mouth parts, which are beetles, thrips, caterpillars, weevils, and spider mites. And it is, I will say, it's similar to the product called BT, Bacillus thuringiensis or something like that, and that it's a bacteria that kills insects. But BT is a highly narrow spectrum. It only kills caterpillars, or it only kills mosquitoes, depending on the strain. Whereas spinosad is, or spinosad, however you say it, is much more broad spectrum. Again, we need to read the label because it is limited to 6 applications a year, and depending on how you're using it, you might even have to use it fewer times a year. I will give Suzanne, if you have anything to add to that page. I know you have some thoughts.
Yes, thank you. I have had a lot of questions are coming in. One thing I can share is that the best, if we are applying products, this question has come up quite a bit, specifically like the neem oil or any type of oil-based eco-friendly product, it can burn the leaves of the plant. So we want to be mindful to not only spray at the end of the day to benefit the beneficial insects, not pose a threat to them, but also the cool part of the day, because we don't want to burn, the oil can burn the tissue of those leaves. I can also share, a question came in by Betty. What about, I'm sorry. Yeah, Betty had mentioned about using the spinosad on her summer squash for leaf miner. I bet it does work. But another comment I'd like to share is, if the insect is on a part of the plant that we're not going to eat, maybe we want to hold on to that spinosad, since we only get to spray it 6 times a year. We're limited to 6 applications because we want to avoid that oh my gosh,
What is that word? I know.
I was just,
resistance.
Yeah, pesticide resistance. Thanks, Charlotte. So it's really the reason why these are on here is, the reason why there is these restrictions on the pesticides isn't there's a reason, and in this case it's pesticide resistance. So if the pest isn't on the edible parts of the plant, then I have a tendency just to monitor, maybe cut those leaves off, maybe squish the larva that's in between the 2 leaves. Irene asked about Sluggo and Sluggo Plus. Wonderful products that will work very well at controlling the slugs and snails, Sluggo. And Sluggo Plus is that iron phosphate with spinosad. So now it's more broad spectrum and will be ideal for not only slugs and snails, but for earwigs, those sow bugs or pill bugs, the roly-polies, cutworms, and a number of other insects. It can get a little expensive though. So I like to make sure my timing is pretty correct, that the pests are present and that I can then monitor. When we use these products according to the label's directions, they're going to be safe. But if we're not reading the label and we're just using them how we think they should be used, they can actually be applied improperly. And when they're applied improperly, then they can pose a threat to the water quality and to maybe our pets and our family and wildlife. So those are just some things I wanted to add. There were some other questions that came up about eucalyptus and gopher traps, and the fava beans and such that we'll address at the end of the program. So stay tuned.
Thank you, Suzanne. And so we'll just wrap up on the chemical controls, just probably repeating a little bit of what we already said. Again, we're using it as a last resort, as we've already tried all of these other mechanical and biological controls. We have to know our pests to make sure that the pest is on that label. We're going to spot apply. We're only spraying the pest when the pest is present, according to the label, of course. We're going to use the less toxic and eco-friendly. These are going to be, hopefully, they generally are a narrower spectrum. They also break down quickly in the environment so that they don't get into the waterways. We're going to spray at the end of the day. That's when the beneficial insects and pollinators are less active. So there's less risk of spraying them or harming them. Also, as Suzanne said, we don't want to be spraying during the heat of the day. And some products actually break down in sunlight too. So we want to have that lasting effect over the nighttime. We are going to avoid applying to all plants when in bloom, because again, we don't want to accidentally harm any pollinators. And we want to understand the consequences. And this is, yes, potentially harming pollinators, bees, but also ourselves, our pets, our children. So we want to make sure that we're spraying very carefully. I forgot to mention we're spraying when there's very little wind, very little to no wind, and not when there is rain in the forecast. Also, we want to continue being very careful wearing our PPE, our long sleeves, our gloves, a mask, eye protection when we are spraying as well.
Sorry, I was just so involved in the questions. Okay, so now let's look at pest problems and troubleshooting. So some of the common pest problems that have already been mentioned in the chat as well are thrips, spider mites, and whiteflies. Not always easy to manage. And so we want to look at a couple of things. Are we attracting beneficial insects? Do we have a nice variety of flowering plants? I know someone's already asked, is there something that we can plant that flowers year round? And I would like to say, I'm not sure. Alyssum does a pretty good job of flowering just about year round, but at some point it might kind of die back and go to seed and then resprout, naturalize the area. But plants, specifically perennials, typically only flower for about 6 weeks. So if you have a plant that can flower longer than 6 weeks, that is a showstopper, and you should plant more of that, or look at other plants in that family. But we're always looking at planting a variety so that we can attract beneficial insects. Another thing to look at is these plants like hot, dry conditions. And so when we have hot, dry conditions, we have a tendency to be watering every day because we think our plants need it. Before you water, again, for those of you that are watering every day, because it is hot in Livermore, it is hot in Pleasanton, it is hot in Dublin. On that side of the county, it gets pretty darn hot. But if you've got your compost in the soil and you've got that nice thick layer of mulch, feel the soil first and make sure that soil is dry. Plants might look like they're wilting. It might not mean because they need more water. It could mean that they need shade. So you might want to set up some shade cloth. Because when we're overwatering plants, they're stressed and they attract these insects. Also, we want to make sure we're feeding with organic fertilizers. There's so many benefits to feeding with organics, but synthetic fertilizers actually stimulate growth that attracts these pest problems. We want to make sure that soil is protected with mulch, and we want to selectively prune. Open up the canopies, open up the branching systems, lift, trim the bottom, few inches or foot of the plant to allow for more air flow. Judy asked about, okay, well, no, I'll get to that in a second. Sorry. Leaf miner. So I know that like Betty's already asked about leaf miner. Leaf miner on veggies. This is actually a little fly. We can put up blue sticky traps as indicators to see when there's activity. It's very common on chard and beets and spinach. These crops really prefer to be grown in the cooler part of the year, and that is when this fly is not active. If we are seeing leaf miner on some of these crops, it's because the temperatures are kind of warm and this fly is very active. We have a citrus leaf miner that's a little moth that's going to be active through the summer and fall is typically when we see that. And then the leaf miner that might be in a squash, or leaf miner that's in the dahlia leaves. I mean, there's a lot of different types of insects that lay their eggs where that larva will mine through the layers. I would invite you just to pay attention, take those notes, see when you start to see the activity. Go to the UCIPM website to find out what is the adult of that leaf miner. And then that will help you identify, put those sticky traps out so you can monitor. And we're going to remove those damaged leaves. We want to remove those eggs. We want to scrape those eggs off with our thumbnail. It's kind of gross, and we want to remove those leaves. But importantly, I'll give you the answer in a moment. We are going to inoculate the soils with beneficial nematodes. And for all of the leaf miners, you really want to make sure you know the name of the species of the leaf miner that you have. And that's why we go to the UCIPM website. We then can find which beneficial nematode, which species of beneficial nematode is going to feed on the larva of that leaf miner, because most of the leaf miners, at some point, once we start to get into the cooler temperatures into winter, they are going to not pupate into adulthood. They're actually going to drop into the soil where it's warm and where they can be protected. And they're just going to hang out in the soil, hibernate through the winter until those temperatures warm. And then they're going to come up and start their life cycle again. When we can add beneficial nematodes to the soil right before they emerge in the spring, so typically around March or April, kind of depends where you live, how the soils are warming. But that's the best way to manage these soil dwelling larval stage of a lot of these problem pests. That includes the thrips, that includes a lot of the beetles, the weevils, the cutworms, and so forth. You can buy the beneficial nematodes online or at your local garden center. So organiccontrols.com, Rincon Vitova, and Tip Top Biocontrol. I'm just now remembering that I did not include this in your helpful gardening research page, the resource page. I will email these to you later. I'm so sorry. I forgot the last time too. So forgive me. But you can reach out to these companies and get some really great information on managing these pests. So pests that are not easy to control with pesticides, like squash bugs, beetles, cutworms, stink bugs, weevils, we want to take advantage of what time of year their larva is going to overwinter in the soil and take advantage of the beneficial nematodes. It's wonderful. I can also share that soldier beetle larva is also going to feed off of a lot of these insects when they're in the soil. So again, more reason to grow biodiversity so that we can keep this healthy habitat, this healthy ecosystem that's in your garden. But when these pests are in your garden, we can simply go around and just knock them off into a bucket of soapy water. So this is when I do get that dish detergent that might have some undesirable things in it. It's not a true soap, but I can mix it with some water and go around and knock beetles and slugs and loopers and caterpillars, weevils, whatever I have out in the garden that I really don't want feeding on my plants. I can just knock them into the bucket of water. And for those of us that are trying to find a good remedy for earwigs, we're just going to get that little plastic deli container. We're going to fill it with a little tiny bit of like fishy oil, maybe fishy oil with a little bit of soapy water. We're going to put the deli lid on it. We're just going to puncture some small holes large enough for the earwigs to get into, but not so big. And we can actually sink those little containers so that the lid is at the soil level around areas of the garden that you have plants that the earwigs are enjoying, such as the dahlias, the roses, any food crops, because this year seems to be a really big year for earwigs. All right, and the next slide is for those of us that maybe we're growing squashes or melons or cucumbers and we're wondering what the heck, why do some of them grow and others just kind of rot? Okay, this is blossom and rot on these crops, which is different than the blossom and rot that might come on the tomatoes and eggplants and such. This is going to be lack of pollinators. So you might have a couple, you might have the zucchini squash where they're all growing, but then a couple of them might have yellowed and gotten weird. It just means that some pollinators didn't pollinate that flower. There's always enough energy for that food to grow, only so much until it starts to wither because it didn't get pollinated. I see this on my cucumbers and my melons. I've got some little watermelons that just are about the size of a tiny pea, and they're just yellowed and then browned when other flowers got pollinated, and my watermelons are growing perfectly. Same with the cucumbers. So just know there's nothing wrong with your soil. You do not have a fungus. It's just you need to get more plants in the area that can attract pollinators, or watch some YouTube videos on how to hand pollinate your flowers so that you can get the food crops you desire.
All right, and last pest that we're going to talk about is a nasty one. I get lots of questions about this. So rats in the garden are awful, and I'm sorry to everyone who has that problem. But there are some things we can do to prevent them or lessen them from coming. Removing harborage, that means removing places where they want to live or hide. So dense ivy, dense brush, jasmine, any piles of wood, places where they can hide and then quickly dart out and get their food. Also, just removing any food sources for them. So that's cleaning up the garden, harvesting anything that you have ready very quickly. Excluding them from the veggie garden with those exclusion cages that we saw earlier, but then also removing food that sources that they can get. So harvesting quickly, any fallen fruits and nuts from trees, clean that up immediately. Contain your compost and your chicken coops because they can get in there, and then really secure the garbage can lid so that they can't get into that either. Also, never free feeding your food, or just never even feeding your pets outside is a good idea, or just being very clean and sanitary about it. Don't let it sit around. Remove it, especially at night. And then bird feeders can attract rats and mice and other critters. They eat the fallen seed. So maybe consider not having bird feeders and instead planting some nice beautiful flowers and letting them go to seed so that your birds can eat those. You do want to invite your birds into the garden to help eat some bugs, but bird feeders are not the best option for that. And then for outdoor, if you have excluded, you've removed food, outdoor trapping can be tricky with snap traps because you can sometimes trap birds and other things that you didn't intend to. So that is tricky, but there's a great trap that is safe, effective, and humane for outdoor rat management. It's this Good Nature A24. It's a CO2 trap. So the rat kind of is attracted up into the tunnel by like a chocolate bait, and then the CO2 air, kind of gross sounding, hard to say, but it blasts them, I guess, in the head, and it kills them very quickly. But it's a very effective, fast way to get rid of rats without harming other critters that you didn't intend to. So wrapping up, we're going to maintain our summer food garden. We're going to continue feeding our veggies with compost and organic fertilizer. We're going to make sure we're watering the roots of the plants nice and deeply. The roots have gone down deep, so we want to make sure we get all of them and not just the surface of the soil. We're going to create and increase the biodiversity in our garden to invite in beneficial bugs and pollinators. We're going to continue monitoring for pests, and we're going to harvest our food both so that we can enjoy the bounty and so that no other critters get it. Some great resources that I'm sure Suzanne has shared, or Suzanne did share on the resource page. Golden Gate Gardening, excellent book for this area, has planting schedules in it for both sunny and foggy areas. The Western Garden Edibles book, How to Grow More Vegetables, and then Plant Partners is a great book about companion planting. And then to learn more about pests, we have the Our Water, Our World website, which has information on lots of common pests and eco-friendly products. The UC IPM website is an amazing wealth of knowledge there about pests, both birds, mammals, weeds, plant diseases, also abiotic disorders, so hail damage, nutrient deficiencies, anything you could possibly have problems with on your plants. Also, it's a great place to go if you don't know what pests you have. So for identification, it has kind of a symptom tracker, so you can use some clues that you have in the garden to narrow down what possible pests you might have. Then there's the bug guide and the National Pesticide Information Center. And with that, thank you. Sorry it went a little bit over, but we answered some of your questions in the middle of it, so hopefully it wasn't so bad. Thank you for joining us today. You can reach out to me and Suzanne anytime at our emails down there below or on our Instagram. And thank you again to Alameda Clean Water Program for hosting this event.
Thank you, everyone. We are sorry that we did get over time a little bit.